welcome to Fantasia, home of the Melodious. My name's Azallea, and today, gonna be bringing you guys another update to my Windwitch deck. Now, I know in the past when I've used Windwitches, they're more or less of a side engine in my deck, such as Windwitch Ritual Beasts and Windwitch Magispecters. They were really only used to put Crystal Wing onto the field before you went off on your standard combo for whatever archetype that you put the Windwitches in. For this deck profile, I actually wanted to try something a little different. I wanted to try my best to make Windwitches the core focus of the deck. I didn't want them to be a little side engine that just made Crystal Wing, although that's still what they do in this deck, but I still want to give them different avenues of being able to play, and instead of making them the engine, I wanted to put other engines into the archetype in order to synergize with them instead of them synergizing with the other archetypes, right? So without any further ado, let's just jump right into this. So starting off, we're actually starting off with 3 copies of Windwitch Icebell. Now, Icebell, of course, is the main monster in the Windwitch archetype, and she's the facilitator of all your plays. She's really infamous for being the 1-card Crystal Wing combo. So if you control no monsters, you can actually special summon her straight from your hand, and then you can special summon 1 Windwitch monster from your deck to your side of the field. When she's normal or special summoned, you can actually inflict 500 damage to your opponent, which more or less doesn't really matter too much, but it could help in the long run. And also, if you use her effect to special summon another Windwitch from your deck, you actually cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck the turn that you activate this effect, except for level 5 or higher wind monsters. But that restriction doesn't matter too much because the way we designed the extra deck for this build actually makes it so that, you know, most of the monsters in there are going to be high-level wind synchro monsters. So yeah, that's why we play 3 copies of her. Now, the rest of the ratios are a little bit different, because I said, like I said before, this is supposed to be more of a focus on the Windwitches monsters themselves than using them as just an engine for Crystal Wing. So instead of playing 2 copies of Windwitch Glassbell, I'm actually playing 3 copies of Windwitch Glassbell. Now, Glassbell is the monster you're typically going to be summoning off of the Icebell, and she is the searcher for the deck. So if this card is no more special summoned, you can add 1 Windwitch monster from your deck to your hand, except Windwitch Glassbell. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except for wind monsters. So Windwitch Glassbell is really great because she's a level 4 tuner. Now, of course, she restricts you to the attribute of monsters you can summon for the rest of the turn if you use her search effect, but the restriction doesn't really apply if you don't search with her, right? So if you just had her in your hand, you normal summoned her, you could use her as a level, just a regular level 4 tuner. So that's actually pretty nice. So I play 3 copies of her because she's pretty good to actually draw into. If you don't have your Icebell, she can search out the Icebell for you. Okay, so the next card that we play is actually 2 copies of Windwitch Snowbell. So instead of playing 1, I play 2. Just in case you lose your first Crystal Wing to something, you have the option of going for another one, right? So that's why 2 copies of Snowbell are in here. So it reads that if you control 2 or more wind monsters and no non-wind monsters, you can actually special summon this card straight from your hand, and a wind synchro monster that was special summoned using this card as a synchro material cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So this is how we get the invincible Crystal Wing, where if you use this as the final tuner to summon the Crystal Wing cannot be destroyed by card effects. So that's really nice. And of course, the 2 wind monsters on the field are already satisfied because you have Icebell summoning Glassbell. Glassbell searches the Snowbell, and then you can special summon the Snowbell straight from your hand. So now that's the Windwitches out of the way, let's move on to the main core of the supports that help us with our Windwitch plays. So we're starting off with 2 copies of Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, the Spellbook engine is actually really strong in this deck because it synergizes really well with the Windwitches themselves, being because they're spellcasters as well. So these Spellbook engine actually helps us deep draw into our deck, basically like a Pot of Greed every time we activate Spellbook of Knowledge, so that's why it's really great. And Spellbook Magician of Prophecy is just so good in this deck because we don't really normal summon this deck, aside from maybe Glassbell. That's if you open unoptimally and you have to search your Icebell to set up for next turn. So otherwise, you're really just going to be summoning him, and if this card is normal summoned or flip face up, you can actually add one Spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand. So you can search out secrets, you can search out knowledge. It's just really, really great, right? And other than that, the level 2 comes up sometimes if you're going for some synchro plays. You can actually really easily make a level 9 synchro monster. If you summoned Ice Spell from your hand, then you summon Glass Spell from your deck, and then you normal summoned your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, that's actually a really easy way for you to summon things like Mistworm from your extra deck. Okay, so moving on, we're actually going to the next engine that we play, which is the Artifact engine. Now, artifacts have been pretty infamous for just being able to synergize with Windwitches, playing on the opponent's turn, bypassing the wind restrictions that the Windwitches typically place on you during your turn. So that's why I also included it here, but it's also because the deck is a little bit slower and it does rely more on back row, and artifacts being able to block your opponent out from the extra deck like we can with 3 copies of Artifact Scythe is just way too powerful to pass up at the moment, especially with spirals just spiraling out of control at the moment with double helix getting released. They're really, really powerful. So with Artifact Scythe, of course, just like all the other artifacts, you can just set this to your spell and trap zones if you do happen to draw into them. And, you know, your opponent will probably be playing like Mystical Space Typhoon, Twin Twisters, or some form of back row removal to destroy these cards. And if they do just blindly hit you, you know, maybe game 1 they're not familiar with what deck you're running, they could easily just lose themselves if they hit an artifact. So that's why I really do like playing 3. You can also blow them up with your own Mystical Space Typhoons and such, but you might think of it as a minus, but really, if your opponent is losing their whole turn because they can't summon from the extra deck, they can't go off on their spiral combos, their Destrudo combo is being interrupted by Artifact Scythe and such, you're basically in a really strong position. I would definitely take the -1 to set myself up for a victory. Right? So 3 copies of Artifact Scythe, mostly because if I played 2, I found out that I tend to run out of targets for my Sanctums if I drew into, like, more Sanctums early on and I didn't have enough monsters in my deck left for them. So that's the reason why, and I didn't really go over the effect, but it was implied throughout this discussion that Artifact Scythe, if this card is summoned on your opponent's turn, they cannot summon from the extra deck, so that's always nice. Right, so that's it for Artifact Scythe. The other card that we actually play is 1 copy of Artifact Moral Talk. Limited for a reason. It's very, very powerful. Non-targeting destruction, and it's just so good, and it adds versatility to your Sanctums, right? So if your opponent's not really playing too much from the extra deck, or you don't really need the Scythe at the moment. They've already summoned a few things out from the extra deck. You can actually pop key cards, like maybe their Decode Talker or something. Maybe they're setting up for their Link monsters, and you feel like it's more appropriate to stop those plays and save your Scythes for later. Then, Moral Talk's still a good option. It can destroy a variety of different things on the field. Okay, so next we're going to go into some of the hand traps that we play. Pretty standard lineup for hand traps. We're playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Phenomenal hand trap right now. Hits field spells, hits monsters that activate on the field. It's just very, very versatile. And you can also use it as a level 3 tuner if you really wanted to. Because the artifacts are level 5, if you normal summon the Ghost Ogre, you can go for a level 8 synchro. But that doesn't really come up too much. It's just an option that we have. So the next card that we play, last card that we play, of course, is going to be the Maxi. Maxi puts a complete halt to your opponent's plays. It's really good for if you're chaining into Destrudo, because then your opponent's paying half their life points, summoning Destrudo, you get a draw off that, and they either continue and summon their extra deck monster like Ancient Fairy Dragon or something, get you another draw, so you went +1 essentially, or they stop there and they have a really easy field for you to run over, and they've already lost half of their life points, so it's really, really easy at that point for you to just win, right? So Maxi, definitely a really good card right now. So that does it for the monsters. Next off, we're going to go into the spell cards. Okay, so for the spell cards, starting off, we are playing 2 copies of Spellbook of Secrets. Now, Spellbook of Secrets allows you to add 1 Spellbook card from your deck to your hand, except for another copy of itself, and you can only activate 1 copy of this per turn. So you can actually search the Spellbook Magician of Prophecy with this card, which is pretty nice, and you can also, of course, search out the Spellbook of Knowledge, which is the main part of this Spellbook engine. So for Spellbook of Knowledge, I'm actually playing 3 copies of Spellbook of Knowledge. You could play 2. I just found that 3 was very effective, especially just because you don't have to tribute your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy for this effect. You can actually normal summon your Glass Spell, search your Ice Spell, and then tribute off your Glass Spell that you normal summoned, get 2 draws, and now your field is clear, so the next turn your Ice Spell can actually trigger and you can get your Crystal Wing. And I'll get into some of the cards later, so you don't actually have to worry about having a clear field. Having a clear field in this deck is actually not too bad of play, especially because it plays mind games with your opponent. This deck, it's very fun to play, to say the least. Okay, so 3 copies of Spellbook of Knowledge I found is a pretty good ratio. So even if you draw into Knowledge by itself, if you normal summon the Glass Spell, normal summon any other spellcaster type monster, tribute it off, get 2 more draws, it just gets your engine rolling. Okay, speaking of getting the engine rolling, if we don't get off to a pretty decent start, we do have ways to basically stall or annoy our opponent, and it's really fun to play these cards. So I like to play 3 copies of Scapegoat in this deck. So Scapegoat, of course, allows you to summon 4 sheep tokens to your side of the field in defense position. They cannot be attributed for a tribute summon, but you can use them for synchro materials, which is pretty nice. But during the turn you activate this card, you cannot actually summon anything else. So typically you're going to be setting this card, and either during your opponent's battle phase or something to wall off their attack, or during their end phase you would flip this card and summon 4 tokens, so that next turn you can go for some link plays with them. Since the goat tokens are actually earth, you can make Mrs. Radiant, you can easily make things like Proxy Dragon, Link Spiders, whatever you really need with Scapegoat. It's such a versatile card, and I really do like it in this deck. Especially since, if you can't get your combos off, you can easily summon a bunch of link monsters to your side of the field, and then start, putting some damage on board, putting some bodies on the board so that you can retaliate against your opponent. Okay, the next spell card that we play is actually some standard spell and trap removal. We're playing 3 copies of Mythical Space Typhoon. Not really a huge fan of Twin Twisters because you really like your card advantage in this deck. It's a really grindy deck that you just want to out-resource your opponent with. So Mythical Space Typhoon is just great because really the most important things you have to deal with are things you have to snipe, like field spells or maybe 1 or 2 important back row. You're hitting like strikes. The Solemn Brigade is becoming a little more prevalent right now, so that's why it's pretty good. So yeah, Mythical Space Typhoon, pretty good addition to the main deck. And the last spell card that I play is 1 copy of Raigeki. Really like Raigeki right now. Field board wipes are really powerful. That's why they limited Slumber and they limited Dark Hole again. Mostly because it's so powerful against link monsters, where fields are a little bit more difficult to set up for the slower archetypes. So if you're playing against the rogue deck, things like that, Raigeki is it really does turn the table, even more so than it did before, in my opinion. So, yeah, that does it for these spell cards. Not too many, but yeah, we'll go into the trap cards next. Okay, so for the trap cards, starting off, we are playing 3 copies of Artifact Sanctum. Of course, the Artifact engine is nothing without this. So Artifact engine allows you to special summon 1 artifact monster straight from your deck, and you can only activate 1 of these per turn, and you cannot conduct your battle phase the turn that you activate this card. But if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target 1 card on the field and destroy it. So that's really nice. Artifact Sanctum, of course, you can bypass all the restrictions just by summoning stuff on your opponent's turn, like you're supposed to, or else you don't get your artifact effects anyway. So Artifact Sanctum is just great, especially if your opponent is like very cautious of your back row and they're going to start sniping them. If they snipe the Artifact Sanctum, they're going to lose a ton of advantage, especially if you summon a Moral Talk off of this. You basically get 2 free pops, and they lost, their Mystical Space Typhoon or whatever they used to destroy your Sanctum. So you're breaking even because you're losing your trap for a monster, but they lost 1 card trying to pop this, and they're losing 2 additional cards because you're popping 2 of their cards. So they're going -3 off of that, which is really, really bad for them. And you're breaking even, so you're looking really good in card advantage at that point. So that's why Sanctum is absolutely amazing in this deck. The next card that I play, you can play whatever you like in the slot, but I really, really do love Drowning Mirror Force right now. 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force in this deck. Like I said, if you have a clear field, your opponent's going to be very, very tempted to just try to attack for game. Not too many people are running Mirror Forces right now, and Drowning is just so good. People don't expect it. They'll expect some things like Quaking and Storming. They're a little bit more common because they're less situational, but Drowning Mirror Force in this deck is ridiculous. So you can, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, while you control no monsters, you can shuffle all attack position monsters your opponent controls into the deck, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. So even if you control, one Crystal Wing or something like that, and they get rid of it, they kaiju'd it, they attacked over the kaiju, and they're trying to swing for game, the Drowning Mirror Force just says no, clears all of their cards, they lose all their advantage, and next turn, again, you can just start going off again. You have more ice spells, you have more glass spells, you have the goat tokens to help set up for link plays and synchro plays. So this deck is just phenomenal with this card. But again, feel free to replace it with whatever Mirror Force you're more comfortable with running. The last 4 cards that we play are actually going to be the Solemn Brigade. So we're playing 3 copies of Solemn Strike. I don't really need to explain it. It's just such a good card right now. And then we're also playing 1 copy of Solemn Warning. So the Solemn Brigade is just really great for negating our opponent's summons, stopping them from summoning their boss monsters while we get ours onto the field. And it's just a great way to gain control of the duel, to possess control of the field, having a larger field, more established field, gaining card advantage. That's what this deck is all about. So yeah, that does it for the trap cards. Next off, we're going to go into the side deck. Okay, so for the side deck, starting off, just like with all of my other deck profiles, I like to run 3 copies of Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. Now, this card is going to be so good right now if you have a copy of Spiral Double Helix, because spirals are going to come out. They're going to be very, very powerful and scary to play against. If you can hit their Double Helix with this card, it's going to be amazing. And the extra deck for this deck is not tight at all. There's a lot of space for innovation, for changes, and for whatever fits your playstyle more, right? But you can easily find a space for 1 copy of Double Helix to hit with this card. Definitely. So that's definitely why this is in here. The next card that we play is we're actually siding a mini engine to kind of substitute out the artifacts for, because the opponent, might start siding out their back row removal and things like that, because they know, okay, they're playing artifacts, there's no point in me trying to pop their back row when it could potentially lose me the duel. There's a engine that I'm siding in that's very hyper offensive, you could say, where you could just easily clear out your opponent's field, regain your advantage, regain your cards, and then just keep pushing for a ton of damage by utilizing a lot of boss monsters. So we're actually playing 3 copies of Fairy Tale Luna. I absolutely love this card because the artwork is amazing, but this card is actually a spellcaster type monster, which is really great. It synergizes with our Spellbook engine, and this card says when this card is normal summoned, you can add 1 spellcaster type monster with 1850 attack from your deck to your hand, which includes itself because it has 1850 attack, so you can search out multiple copies of it throughout the course of the duel. Once per turn, during either player's turn, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. Your opponent can send 1 card with the monster's name from their deck or the extra deck to the graveyard to negate this effect. Otherwise, you have to return both of this card and that monster to the hand. So this card is basically like a more fair version of Magispector Unicorn Kirin, right? So this is just an absolutely insane card. Not only does it have synergy with our deck, but it also is ridiculous with the Kaiju engine, which I'm going to show you right now. So 1 copy of Gamma Seal. I don't have Gamma Seal with me, so that's why it's just a proxy. We're playing 1 copy of Kumungus. Kumungus is just 2400 attack. Gamma Seal is 2200, so these are the ones that are more easily run over by the larger ones. We're playing 1 copy of Godala, the Mystery Dust Kaiju, because Godala is actually a wind monster, so if you draw into it, or you search it out with your Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, you can actually use it the same turn you summon your Wind Witches. So you can kaiju your opponent's monsters, start using your Ice Spell, whatever, get Crystal Wing. Crystal Wing can easily run over this card, deal 3000 damage to the opponent. It's going to be very nice. So that's why Godala is in here, instead of, Raijin or whatever the other ones are, the dark one, right? Next off, we're playing some of the big ones. We're playing one copy of Thunder King because it's really high attack. 3,300 attack is ridiculous, and another 3,300 attack one, which is Jizakuru. So these larger monsters are going to be the ones that you actually want to control yourself. So when you give your opponent a kaiju, you actually want to give yourself the bigger kaiju, give them the smaller one. So you, again, control a larger monster. They control a smaller one. You can easily just run over them and regain control of that field. Now, another little side bonus that you get from running kaijus is that when you control a kaiju, your opponent can't kaiju you. So if they're siding in kaijus to try to get rid of your crystal wing and stuff, and you already control a kaiju, they cannot tribute your crystal wing to summon that kaiju to your side of the field. So it's just a win-win, right? So the last card that we play actually is the Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. I actually don't have mine with me right now, but I will have it soon. But yeah, Kaiju Slumber is just a dark hole. It blows up all the monsters on the field, then summons one Kaiju monster to your opponent's side of the field and one Kaiju monster to your side of the field. Normally, you're going to give them cards such as Gamma Seal and give yourself like Jizakuru or Thunder King, and that's going to be really nice. Now, the synergy with the Fairy Tail Luna is that you can actually normal summon the Fairy Tail Luna, target the Kaiju that you gave to your opponent. Your opponent most likely won't have Kaijus in their deck, you have to return both the Luna and that Kaiju back to your hand. So now you have, more spot removal, and you have an additional monster in your hand. They can normal summon next turn, use its effect again, bounce more cards. It's just super effective as a way to clear your opponent's field, right? So I really do love it. So the last card that we play in this deck is actually going to be 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, we do run some spells in this deck, but we don't run that many. And even with the Spellbook engine, since you can only activate one of each Spellbook card per turn, if you have like multiple copies of Spellbook Secrets or whatever, you use one maybe that turn to search out for something, you can actually set the other one for next turn, and it's going to act as a bluff for your opponent too. And with Anti-Spell Fragrance on the field, your opponent can't really do anything about it, right? They're not going to Mystical Space Typhoon Twin Twisters your back row because they can't with the anti-spell. They can't activate those cards until their next turn comes around if they set it. So you're going to be very safe with this card in utilizing your engine and for stunning your opponent. They can't activate field spells, no pendulum scales, nothing like that. So it's just really effective in this deck. I highly recommend it. I wouldn't play Imperial Order over one copy of anti-spell, whatever. Don't substitute that, because Imperial Order not only just puts you on a timer by, draining your life points every standby phase, but it's also not as effective because it negates all of your spells now. Anti-spell, you can still activate spell cards, you can just activate them a turn later. And because our spell cards are limited to, mostly once per turn and things like that, it's really effective to just play this anti-spell to stun the opponent, and doesn't really hurt you as much. So that does it for the side deck. Next off, we're going to go into the extra deck. Alright, so for the extra deck, starting off, we are playing one copy of Link Spider because we are playing the Scapegoats. Now, Scapegoat, of course, you can just use one of the tokens, which counts as a normal monster, to summon the Link Spider, and then you can summon extra deck monsters under it, which is pretty nice. Typically, you're going to be summoning cards such as either Ib, the World Chalice Priestess, or you're summoning things like Proxy Dragon using the token. So Ib requires 2 monsters with different types and attributes, so of course you can use things like Spellbook, Magician of Prophecy, your Windwitch monsters, whatever, to summon this card. She's pretty good overall. She just protects. She's just like extra protection for your cards, so that's pretty nice. And Ib itself is just a little stronger than Proxy Dragon. She's 1800 attack, so it lets you deal a little bit more damage overall than you would if you just made a Proxy Dragon, right? So that's why she's in here. And again, the extra deck is very flexible. If you want to cut her, you can definitely feel free to cut her. Now, these cards I definitely will not cut from the extra deck, and I'd highly recommend you play this, but we play, not just one, but we're playing 2 copies of Mrs. Radiant, but that's because Scapegoat gives you 4 tokens, and that means you can summon 2 Mrs. Radiant at a time. You can summon one into your link zone right here, and then under its link marker right here, you can summon another copy of Mrs. Radiant. Now, the reason why you would ever do this is because Mrs. Radiant gives a 500 attack boost to all Earth monsters on the field, including itself, because because it's also an Earth monster. So with both of these on the field, Earth monsters will gain 1,000 attack. So both of these Mrs. Radiance will actually be 2,400 attack, which is pretty good. If your opponent, has a pretty weak field, you can attack over their monsters. If you can attack directly, that's going to be a lot of damage as well. That's going to be almost 5,000 damage right to your opponent's face. So that's why 2 copies of Mrs. Radiant, it's situational, but it does work out sometimes, which is pretty good. Next off, we're playing 1 copy of Proxy Dragon. Proxy Dragon, of course, you can just use 2 of these Scapegoat tokens or anything like that. It just requires 2 monsters, and it's just a very versatile card with its side arrows that allow you to summon extra monsters to those zones. And the last Link monster that we play is 1 copy of Decode Talker. Decode Talker is great to summon sometimes, especially if you have like multiple scapegoats. You have scapegoats that you use to make your Link Spider, Proxy Dragon, whatever. You went to Decode Talker. Then if you set your other scapegoat during your opponent's turn, you can summon goat tokens to the Link markers that Decode Talker points to. Decode Talker gains a bunch of attack. You gain a bunch more monsters to work with for next turn to go for Link summons and things like that. So yeah, Decode Talker is pretty decent in the deck. So yeah, that does it for the Link monsters. Quite a bit, but again, you can cut some if you really want to. I would just highly recommend playing the 2 Mrs. Radiant at least for your scapegoats. Now, next off, we're going to go into the XYZs. So for the XYZs, I'm only playing 2 XYZs in this deck. You don't really go for these very often, but when you do, it basically ensures that you have game. So we're playing 1 copy of Constellar Pleiades. Pleiades is great because you can overlay 2 of your artifacts for this, and once per turn, during either player's turn, you can detach 1 XYZ material from this card to target 1 card on the field and return that target to the hand. So it's like a compulse. Or if your opponent's setting like 1 back row and ending their turn during the end phase, bounce that back row back to their hand so you don't have to worry about it. It's just a very, very nice card overall. I really do like the card. The next card that I play is actually 1 copy of Constellar Ptolemy M7. So the way you summon M7 is actually you overlay it on top of the Pleiades during your main phase 2, and what it does is allows you to actually target 1 monster in either the graveyard or on the field, and you can return that to the hand. It could be your opponent's stuff, it could be your own stuff. So you can compulse your opponent's monster, or you can add hand traps or whatever back from your deck graveyard back to your hand. Add back Windwitch, Ice Bell, something like that. If you know that next turn M7 might not survive, so that you have some extra plays. You have backup that you can go for your following turn. So that's kind of why I like these 2 cards. They don't come too often. You don't have to play them. You can substitute them for whatever you think is better. But yeah, 2 XYZs, very simple. Next off, we're going to go into the Synchros. So the main bulk of this extra deck is going to be these Synchro monsters. So we're starting off with 1 copy of Stardust Charge Warrior. Stardust Charge Warrior is pretty good because it allows you to draw an extra card when it's summoned, and it can attack all of your opponent's special summon monsters each. So if your opponent's playing Scapegoat, which is pretty common in some more rogue decks, if they're trying to halt off a battle phase and you have a Stardust Charge Warrior, you can actually attack all special summon monsters your opponent controls once each. So just with the Stardust Charge Warrior, you can easily clear out each of their tokens and then use your remaining monsters to hopefully attack directly for game. So that's actually one of the reasons why it's here. Also, Wind Synchro Monster. Very, very, very useful in this deck with so many restrictions from the Wind Witches. The next card that we play is 1 copy of Windwitch Winterbell. Winterbell is the standard play that you would use to go into your Crystal Wing, so Ice Bell and Glass Bell synchros into a Winterbell. Winterbell is the effect that you can target 1 Windwitch monster in your graveyard and inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level times 200. So typically you're going to be targeting your Glass Bell in your graveyard, and it's going to be inflicting 800 damage to your opponent. On top of the 500 that you got from the Ice Bell, that's going to be 1300 damage, quite a bit of damage in the long run. 1300 is where it starts to begin to matter. That's like 1 copy of Solemn Strike, less that your opponent can play. So that's really nice. It also has the effect that during the battle phase, you can actually target 1 Windwitch monster you control and then special summon a monster from your hand that's a level that's equal to or less than that Windwitch monster. So it's a great way to swarm the field during the battle phase, but that, again, really doesn't come up too often because you're going to be using her to synchro into your Crystal Wing. So the next card that we use, that's a level 7 Wind Synchro to go into our Crystal Wing, is going to be a Clear Wing Synchro Dragon. Clear Wing, again, doesn't come up too much. As a level 7, you don't really want to leave them on the field. It's kind of weak, 2500 attack compared to something like Crystal Wing that can get unaffected by your opponent's destruction effects and things like that. Very, very nice. But Clear Wing does come up sometimes, especially you know, to run over some kaijus. Maybe you gave your opponent Gamma Seal and you need something to run over it. Winter Bell and Clear Wing can definitely do that for you as well. Next off, we're actually running one copy of Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon's pretty good overall, mostly because it helps you protect your back row. If you have more sensitive back row, like maybe you didn't draw into your Sanctums or something like that, you want to bluff that you're protecting strikes or something. Your opponent might try to bait out Stardust and try to pop your back row. It turns out there's actually artifacts in there. It's just a great way to play mind games with your opponent, and it's, of course, another really good Wind Synchro monster. There aren't too many good ones that are high level that aren't restricted to like certain archetypes, so that's why these are the more standard ones you're going to see in any Windwitch deck profile. So next off, we're playing two copies of Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Of course, the Windwitches really love summoning the Crystal Wing, and Crystal Wing, two copies of it is pretty nice. We're playing enough Windwitches that we can actually summon two in every game that we play, so that's why it's two of them are there. And last but not least, I mentioned this earlier in the deck profile, but you can actually summon Mistworm in this deck. And Mistworm, really good card, because if you summon your Ice Bell, special summon the Glass Bell from your deck, then normal summon your Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. That's 3 + 4, which is 7, then +2 from the Spellbook Magician, which is 9. So you can actually synchro into the Mistworm, and if this card is synchro summoned, you can target up to 3 cards your opponent controls, return those targets to the hand. Very, very powerful card that can easily clear out your opponent's field, clear out their back row, bait things out before you start swinging for some damage. So I really do like the card as a tech. And yeah, that does it for the extra deck, and that does it for the deck profile. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe for more Windwitch content, and leave a comment down below letting me know what I can do to improve. And until next time, take care.